Hey everyone, welcome back to Slumber Senpai. Before we dive into tonight's story, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching this from and what time it is for you right now. Are you settling in for the night with this playing softly in the background? Or maybe you're on a long commute and need something to lose yourself in? Drop a comment and let me know. I always find it fascinating to think about all of you out there in different time zones, different circumstances, but all drawn to these same stories. There's something beautiful about that connection. Tonight, we're doing something a little different. With all the excitement building around Pokémon Legends ZA, I know speculation is running wild about what we might see, what new features might be revealed, what mysteries might finally be solved. But tonight isn't about speculation. Tonight isn't about theories or predictions or wild guesses about what could be. Tonight is about the stories that are already there, waiting in the foundations of Kalos itself. The stories that have always been there, carved into the very stones of the region, whispered through its forests, reflected in the lights of its greatest city. This is the bedtime story of Kalos, the real history, the canon tales, the legends that make the region what it is. We're going to take our time with these stories because they deserve it. We're going to let them breathe, let them unfold naturally, the way good stories should. So get comfortable, adjust your pillows, dim your lights if you haven't already, and let's step back 3,000 years into the past of the Kalos region. But before we travel that far back, I want you to understand something about the way these stories connect. History isn't a series of isolated events. It's a river, each moment flowing into the next, causes creating effects that ripple forward through centuries. The story of a heartbroken king 3,000 years ago connects directly to the guardian sleeping beneath the earth, which connects to the city of light we know today. Everything is woven together, and tonight we're going to trace those threads carefully, reverently, from the ancient past to the modern present. The tale begins not with grand armies or legendary Pokémon, but with something quieter, something more personal. It begins with a gift 3,000 years before the events we know from Pokémon X and Y, before the modern Kalos region took shape. Before Lumiose City became the beacon of culture and art it would one day embody, there was a king. History remembers him only by two letters, A and Z, both the beginning and the end, though whether this was truly his name or simply what time has reduced him to, we cannot say with certainty. What we do know is that he ruled over Kalos during a time of relative prosperity, and that he possessed technology far beyond what should have been possible in that era. But none of that mattered to him as much as a single Pokémon. A Floette, small and delicate, with a flower different from any other Floette that would ever be seen. This wasn't just any Floette, this was an eternal flower Floette, and it had belonged to his mother. When she passed, the Floette came to him, a final gift, a living connection to the woman who had raised him. Some might have seen it as a responsibility, a burden of care. AZ saw it as a treasure beyond measure. In those early days, before war came to Kalos, the relationship between the king and his Floette was something pure, not the bond between a trainer and their Pokémon in the modern sense. Though certainly there was that element of partnership, this was deeper, more fundamental. Floette was his companion in the truest sense of the word, present at his side during royal duties, floating gently beside him as he walked through palace gardens, sharing moments of quiet when the weight of the crown became too heavy to bear alone. The Floette had its flower, of course, that distinctive eternal flower that it carried, Not pink or orange or yellow like the flowers of other Floette, but something unique, something special. A bloom that seemed to capture light differently, that held colors no other flower could hold. AZ would watch it sometimes, the way Floette tended to that flower, the gentle care it showed. It reminded him of his mother, the way she had cared for the gardens, the way she had cared for him. The palace in those days was not the ruins we might imagine when we think of ancient civilizations. AZ's technology saw to that. He was an inventor, a mind that grasped concepts his contemporaries could barely comprehend. The palace featured innovations that wouldn't be seen again in Kalos for thousands of years. Lighting systems powered by energy sources that predated modern understanding. Devices that could project images, store information, perform calculations. His people saw him as blessed by the gods, gifted with knowledge from beyond mortal understanding. In truth, he was simply brilliant, perhaps dangerously so. But that brilliance, that technological mastery, meant nothing in the moments he spent with Floette. Those moments were simple, human, unmarred by the complexity of invention or the burden of rule. Sometimes they would sit together in the highest tower of the palace, looking out over the lands AZ governed. Floette would drift in lazy circles, investigating the stonework, the tapestries, the strange devices AZ would leave scattered about his personal chambers. And AZ would talk, sharing his thoughts, his concerns, his dreams for what Kalos could become. He dreamed of unity. The region in those days was fractured, not quite the cohesive whole it would become. City-states and territories, each with their own governance, their own concerns. AZ believed technology could bridge these divides, that innovation could bring prosperity to all corners of Kalos. He was young then, still idealistic, still believing that good intentions and brilliant minds could solve any problem. Floette would listen, or at least AZ believed it listened. Perhaps it understood more than he knew. Pokémon have always been more perceptive than humans give them credit for. More aware of the currents of emotion and intention that flow beneath words. Whatever the case, Floette's presence brought him comfort, gave him something constant in a world of political maneuvering and constant demand. The gardens where his mother had spent so much time became a sanctuary for both of them. AZ maintained them personally, refusing to delegate the work to servants. It was here that he felt closest to the memory of the woman who had given him both life and crown. Here that he could set aside the weight of kingship and simply be. Floette seemed to understand this instinctively, showing particular interest in the flowers his mother had planted, as if recognizing something of its former companion in the blooms. There's a particular poignancy in thinking about those peaceful days, knowing what was to come. AZ didn't know that his happiness was borrowed time. He couldn't see the storm gathering beyond his borders, couldn't predict that the world he knew was about to shatter. He was content, or as content as a king could be. He had his work, his innovations, his vision for Kalos's future. And he had Floette, the living link to his past, the companion who made the present bearable, the small Pokémon that represented everything good in his life. The palace staff grew accustomed to seeing them together. The tall king, even then unusually tall for his people, though not yet the towering figure he would become, and the small Floette never far from his side. They became a familiar sight, a symbol of the kingdom's stability. If the king was well, if he had his companion, then all was well in Kalos. It was a simple equation, one that seemed as solid and permanent as the stones of the palace itself. But permanence is an illusion, stability is a temporary state. And peace, no matter how deeply rooted it seems, can be torn away in an instant when war comes calling. The first signs were subtle, messengers arriving at odd hours, advisors huddled in urgent conversation, AZ spending longer hours in council meetings, emerging with troubled expressions. The nature of kingship meant he was privy to information long before his people, and what he learned in those early days must have filled him with dread. Another region whose identity history has not preserved with certainty was mobilizing. Disputes over territory, resources, old grievances nursed into fresh hatred, the usual ingredients of conflict mixing into an inevitable poison. AZ did what he could to prevent the war through diplomatic means. We know this from fragments of records, from references in documents that survived the millennia. He sent envoys, he proposed negotiations, compromises, treaties. But some forces, once set in motion, cannot be stopped by words alone. The other region wanted war, needed it perhaps, for reasons that have been lost to history. And so war came to Kalos. In those early days of the conflict, it might have seemed manageable. Armies clashing at borders, strategic points contested, the usual ebb and flow of military engagement. AZ's technological superiority gave Kalos advantages. His understanding of machinery, of energy, of systems, translated into innovations his generals could use. But war has a way of escalating, of growing beyond anyone's ability to control it. What began as border skirmishes grew into something larger, darker, more desperate. And desperate times call for desperate measures. Both sides began to rely more heavily on Pokémon, not as partners, not as companions, but as weapons. Tools of war, living artillery to be deployed, expended, replaced. The strong Pokémon, those with unique abilities, with raw power, became targets for conscription. Armies would sweep through areas, gathering Pokémon by force, pressing them into service whether their trainers consented or not. AZ must have watched this development with growing horror. He, who had always seen Pokémon as individuals, as beings worthy of respect and care, was now watching them reduced to munitions. But he was king, and a king's primary responsibility is to his people, to their safety, to their survival. So he didn't stop the practice. He couldn't, not without abandoning his kingdom to almost certain defeat. It's one of history's cruel ironies that good people are so often forced into evil choices by circumstances beyond their control. The war dragged on. Months became years. Historical records from this era are fragmentary at best, making it impossible to determine the exact duration of the conflict. What we can say with certainty is that it lasted long enough for an entire generation to grow up knowing nothing but war, long enough for the initial causes to fade from living memory while the fighting continued, long enough for the initial causes to become almost forgotten, the fighting continuing simply because neither side could imagine any other state of existence, long enough for the cost in lives, both human and Pokémon, to climb to staggering, almost incomprehensible numbers. AZ tried to keep Floette separate from all of it. The palace remained a sanctuary, a place where the war couldn't reach. He forbade any discussion of military matters in Floette's presence, as if by protecting the Pokémon from knowledge of the conflict, he could preserve some small piece of the innocence they had once shared. It was a futile gesture, of course. Pokémon are sensitive to the emotional states of those around them, and AZ's distress was impossible to hide completely. But then came the day when Sanctuary proved to be no protection at all. Soldiers came to the palace, not enemy forces, but AZ's own military commanders. The war had reached a critical juncture. They needed every advantage, every possible edge, and AZ's Floette, they argued, was a Pokémon of unusual power, possessed of abilities that could turn the tide of battles. It was the king's duty, they said, to contribute his Pokémon to the war effort, just as his subjects had been forced to contribute theirs. AZ refused. Of course he refused. Floette was not a weapon. Floette was his companion, his connection to his mother, a living being who deserved to live in peace, not to be thrown into the meat grinder of war. He was the king, his word was law, and his word was no. The soldiers left, respectfully but unhappily. They had orders to be firm, but even they couldn't bring themselves to defy their king directly, not over something so personal. But in war, there are always those who believe the ends justify any means. Always those who will do what they believe is necessary, regardless of law or morality, or the explicit commands of their superiors. AZ learned this in the most brutal way possible. He woke one morning to find Floette gone, not floating beside his bed as it always was, not investigating the morning light as it streamed through palace windows. Gone. The flower it always carried, the eternal flower, lay on the pillow beside him, deliberately placed, a message. They had taken Floette while he slept, forcing it to drop the flower, taking it away to the war. The rage AZ must have felt, the betrayal. These were his own people, his own soldiers, and they had violated the sanctity of his private chambers, had stolen from him the most precious thing in his life. He demanded answers. He demanded Floette's immediate return. He threatened punishments, executions, the dissolution of entire military units. But the soldiers who had taken Floette were already gone, already at the front lines, already deploying their stolen weapon in battles too far away for any messenger to reach in time to stop them. And AZ, for all his power, for all his authority as king, was helpless. He couldn't abandon his kingdom to chase after Floette. He couldn't leave his post, not in the middle of a war that threatened to destroy everything. So he waited, trapped in his palace, clutching that eternal flower, praying to any god that might listen that Floette would be safe, that the Pokémon would survive whatever horrors were being inflicted upon it, that he would see his companion again. Days passed in agony, then weeks. AZ threw himself into his work, into developing new technologies, new weapons, anything that might end the war faster and bring Floette home. He slept barely at all, ate only when servants forced food upon him, driven by a manic energy born of fear and helplessness. The palace staff whispered among themselves, worried for their king's health, but none dared approach him directly. The grief radiating from AZ was too terrible, too raw. And then the box arrived, a simple wooden box, military issue, the kind used to transport the possessions of fallen soldiers back to their families. It was addressed to the king. Inside, cushioned in cloth, was Floette's flower, just the flower, no Floette, no body, no explanation. Just the eternal flower that Floette had carried for so long, returned to its owner in the cruel shorthand of military efficiency. The message was clear. Floette had fallen in battle, died serving a cause it had never chosen, fighting in a war it should never have been part of. Returned to the king in the same way any soldier would be returned to their family, reduced to a single possession, a single symbol of a life ended too soon. Something broke in AZ that day, not metaphorically but literally, fundamentally. The part of him that believed in justice, in order, in the basic rightness of the world, shattered beyond any hope of repair. His mother was dead. Now Floette was dead. Everything he had loved, everything that had connected him to anything good or pure or worthwhile, was gone, taken by a war that seemed to have no purpose anymore beyond its own perpetuation. But AZ was not just a heartbroken man. He was a genius, a mind that understood principles of energy and life and technology that no one else in his time could grasp. And in his grief, in his rage, in his absolute refusal to accept what had happened, he made a decision that would echo through 3,000 years of history, that would reshape the world, that would curse him to an existence he could never have imagined in his darkest nightmares. He would bring Floette back, whatever the cost, whatever the consequence, whatever laws of nature he had to break. He would not accept this death. He would not let Floette be just another casualty of a pointless war. And so, in the deepest chambers of his palace, in the hours when even his most loyal servants were asleep, AZ began to build, not a weapon, not yet, something else, something that had never existed before, a machine that could restore life itself. The device AZ constructed was unlike anything the world had seen. Even now, 3,000 years later, with all our modern understanding of technology and Pokémon and energy, we struggle to fully comprehend what he achieved. The machine he built required resources that shouldn't have been available to that era, materials that required mining operations, refining processes, assembly techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. That AZ managed to create it at all speaks to the depth of his genius and the intensity of his obsession. But genius and obsession alone weren't enough. The machine needed power, vast amounts of it, more than any conventional source could provide. And not just any power. Life energy, the fundamental force that animates all living things, that separates a living Pokémon from an inanimate object, that keeps hearts beating and minds thinking. This energy exists in all living creatures, flowing through them, sustaining them, and when they die, dissipating back into the world. AZ's machine was designed to capture this energy, to gather it, to concentrate it, and then to redirect it into a specific target. In this case, into Floette's remains, which he had recovered from the battlefield at tremendous personal risk. The theory was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. Life energy could be transferred from one being to another. Death could be reversed if you were willing to pay the price in other lives. How did AZ come to understand this principle? How did he develop the technology to harness life energy in the first place? The answers have been lost to time, though Professor Sycamore and other researchers have theorized that he somehow accessed the power of legendary Pokémon. The ultimate weapon in both its resurrection and destructive configurations bore characteristics that suggested legendary influence. In one version of events, drawing on Xerneas' life-granting abilities, in another, channeling Yveltal's power over death, somehow translating these fundamental forces into mechanical form. But understanding the theory and implementing it were very different challenges. AZ needed massive amounts of life energy, far more than any single Pokémon could provide. The machine would require dozens, perhaps hundreds of Pokémon, their life force drained completely to power the resurrection of a single individual. It was an unconscionable trade, a mathematical equation that weighed Floette's life against countless others. AZ made the trade without hesitation. Grief had consumed any moral calculus he might have once possessed. The soldiers had taken Floette, and Floette had died because of their choice. Now other Pokémon would die because of his choice. Perhaps he saw it as justice, a terrible balancing of scales. More likely, he simply didn't care. Nothing mattered except bringing Floette back. The process of gathering the necessary Pokémon was, in itself, a horror. AZ couldn't exactly announce his intentions, even in wartime, even in a society that had grown desensitized to Pokémon being used as weapons. What he was planning would have been recognized as monstrous. So he worked in secret, using his authority as king to requisition Pokémon under false pretenses. Training programs that never took place, medical research that never happened, defense initiatives that were pure fabrication. The Pokémon came to his hidden workshop in the palace depths, and they never left. One by one, they were placed in the machine's energy extraction apparatus. One by one, their life force was drained, stored, accumulated in the great energy cores AZ had constructed. The device he built was flower-shaped, a deliberate choice, a reflection of Floette's eternal flower, though this mechanical bloom would deal in death rather than life, at least initially. We don't know exactly how long this process took, weeks at minimum, more likely months. Each Pokémon provided only so much energy, and the amount needed for resurrection was astronomical. AZ must have become intimately familiar with the process, with the exact moment, when the light left their eyes, when their struggling ceased, when they became nothing more than empty vessels, their energy transferred to his machine. Did he feel guilt? Did he recognize what he was becoming? Or was he so far gone into grief and obsession that he viewed the Pokémon as nothing more than fuel, necessary components in the equation that would return Floette to him? The historical record is silent on these questions, and perhaps that silence is its own answer. Some things are too dark to speak of, too terrible to record. We know the machine was completed. We know it was activated. We know it succeeded. The resurrection itself must have been a sight beyond description. The accumulated life energy of hundreds of Pokémon, perhaps more, channeled through AZ's device, focused on a single target. The remains of Floette laid carefully in the machine's central chamber, surrounded by energy conduits and focusing lenses and technologies that combined the mechanical with something else, something that touched on the mystical, the fundamental forces of life and death themselves. When AZ activated the device, the palace must have been flooded with light, not normal light, but something otherworldly, a radiance that came from the release of raw life energy. The machine hummed, thrummed, sang with power as it redirected all that captured vitality into one small Pokémon. And in that chamber, in the heart of the device, something impossible happened. Floette's eyes opened. The eternal flower, which AZ had carefully placed with the Pokémon's remains, was gently grasped again in those small appendages. The Pokémon rose, floating as it always had, alive once more, resurrected, restored, returned. AZ must have felt triumph in that moment, must have felt vindicated, must have believed that his obsession had been justified, that the price paid was worth it, that he had accomplished something no one else in history had ever achieved. He had beaten death itself. He had brought back what had been lost. He reached for Floette, tears streaming down his face, ready to embrace his companion, to promise that they would never be separated again, that he would never let anyone take Floette from him again. And Floette looked at him with eyes that held something AZ hadn't anticipated: horror, revulsion, understanding of what had been done to bring about this resurrection. Pokémon may not speak human language, but they understand more than we often credit. They sense, they know, they comprehend. And Floette comprehended that it stood at the center of a machine powered by death, that hundreds of other Pokémon had been sacrificed so it could live again. But in that moment of reunion, AZ wasn't thinking about consequences. He held Floette close, felt the familiar warmth, the presence he had thought lost forever. The eternal flower was intact, perfect, as if it too had been restored along with the Pokémon who carried it. For a brief time, AZ allowed himself to believe that everything would be all right now. The machine had worked, Floette was alive. They could return to how things were before, except they couldn't. And AZ should have known that, should have realized that resurrection came with costs beyond the obvious ones he'd already paid. The machine didn't just restore life, it altered it. The life energy used to power Floette's resurrection had to go somewhere, had to do more than simply restart biological processes. It infused Floette, saturated every cell, granted something that had never been intended. Floette would never die again, neither would AZ. The machine, in the moment of activation, had released enough excess energy to affect not just its target, but its creator as well. The immortality granted to Floette was shared with the king who had built the device to resurrect it. They were both cursed now, though AZ didn't understand this yet, didn't grasp that he had condemned himself to watch centuries pass, to outlive everything and everyone he would ever know, to carry the guilt of what he'd done forward through millennia. In those first hours after the resurrection, none of this was apparent. AZ was simply happy, relieved, vindicated. He cared for Floette with the same devotion he always had, perhaps even more intensely now that he understood how fragile happiness could be, how quickly it could be stolen away. Floette seemed subdued, quieter than before, but AZ attributed this to the trauma of death and resurrection. Time would heal this, he believed. They would find their way back to the easy companionship they had once shared. But even as he comforted Floette, even as he tried to convince himself that everything was returning to normal, the war continued. The fighting hadn't stopped just because AZ had achieved his personal miracle. Out there, beyond the palace walls, people were still dying. Pokémon were still being forced into battle. The conflict ground on, indifferent to one king's grief or his triumph over death. And something changed in AZ as the days passed. Maybe it was the realization that the war had taken Floette from him in the first place. Maybe it was the understanding that even with Floette restored, the world was still broken, still cruel, still consuming lives for no purpose he could discern. Maybe it was simply that having crossed one moral boundary, having killed hundreds to save one, subsequent transgressions seemed less significant. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe the machine had changed him in ways beyond granting immortality. Maybe the exposure to that much concentrated life energy, that much power over life and death, had fundamentally altered his thinking, his capacity for empathy, his ability to see other beings as anything more than tools for his purposes. Whatever the reason, AZ looked at his machine, at the device that had given him back Floette, and saw not a resurrection apparatus, but something else. A weapon, the most powerful weapon the world had ever known. All that energy he had gathered, all that life force he had concentrated, could be redirected. Not to restore life, but to end it. To end it on a scale that would dwarf anything the war had accomplished so far. The thought, once it entered his mind, wouldn't leave. He tried to focus on other things, on being present with Floette, on his duties as king, on the daily governance of a kingdom at war. But the idea kept returning. He had the power to end the war, not through negotiation or military victory, but through sheer overwhelming force. He could deploy his machine against both armies, could wipe out everyone who had contributed to the conflict that had taken Floette from him in the first place. It would be justice, he told himself. It would be protection, ensuring that nothing like what happened to Floette could ever happen again. It would save lives in the long run, ending a war that showed no signs of ending on its own. These were the rationalizations, the justifications he built to support what he knew. Deep down was simply revenge. Pure, terrible revenge against a world that had hurt him. Floette sensed the darkness growing in AZ. Pokémon always do. They're more attuned to emotional currents than humans, more aware of the shadows that gather in a person's heart. The Pokémon grew more withdrawn, spending less time at AZ's side, more time floating alone in distant parts of the palace. AZ noticed but attributed it to continued recovery from resurrection. He was so consumed with his plans for the machine that he couldn't see what was obvious to Floette. The king was preparing for atrocity, and there was nothing a small Pokémon could do to stop him. The conversion of the resurrection device into a weapon of mass destruction was, in some ways, simpler than its original construction had been. The fundamental mechanisms were already in place. The energy collection systems, the storage cores, the focusing apparatus, all of it could be adapted with relatively minor modifications. Instead of channeling life energy into a target to restore it, the machine would channel that energy outward in a directed blast, weaponizing death itself. But AZ went further than simple conversion. If he was going to deploy this weapon, he wanted to ensure it would be powerful enough to achieve his goals in a single strike. That meant gathering even more life energy than he had collected for Floette's resurrection. That meant more Pokémon, more deaths, more fuel for the horrible fire he was preparing to unleash upon the world. The gathering process took months. AZ was more careful this time, more strategic. He couldn't afford to draw attention to what he was doing, couldn't risk his own advisors or military commanders learning of his plans and attempting to stop him. So he used intermediaries, loyal servants who didn't question their king's orders, who requisitioned Pokémon from across Kalos under increasingly thin pretenses. The war provided cover for much of this, with so many Pokémon already being conscripted for military service, a few hundred more disappearing into royal programs barely registered. But this time, the Pokémon weren't just being drained of life energy for storage. AZ had refined his process, had discovered ways to capture not just the energy itself, but something else, something harder to define. The essence, perhaps. The fundamental spark that made each Pokémon an individual. All of this went into the machine's cores, accumulated, compressed, building toward a critical mass that would power the weapon's deployment. The location for the weapon's construction and eventual deployment was chosen carefully. Geosenge Town, a settlement in western Kalos, sat above vast underground caverns that AZ's surveys had identified as geologically stable and energetically significant. There was something about that area, something that resonated with the type of work the machine required. Perhaps it was proximity to ley lines, natural channels of energy that flow through the earth. Perhaps it was simply that the bedrock there could support the massive structure AZ needed to build. The weapon was built in absolute secrecy, deep underground, carved into the living rock beneath Geosenge. AZ personally oversaw much of the construction, spending weeks at a time away from the palace, ostensibly touring the kingdom, inspecting military installations, boosting morale. In reality, he was building the instrument of apocalypse. The device, when completed, was massive, far larger than the resurrection machine had been. It had to be to channel the amount of energy AZ planned to deploy. The weapon took the form of a flower, just as the resurrection device had, but this bloom was enormous, mechanical, terrible in its beauty. At its heart, in the central chamber, AZ installed the key that would activate it, a physical token that would serve as the weapon's trigger. He wore this key around his neck, a constant reminder of what he carried, what he was prepared to unleash. Throughout all of this, Floette watched. The Pokémon had initially stayed in the palace when AZ made his trips to Geosenge, but eventually began accompanying him, perhaps unable to bear the separation after having once been lost. Floette saw the weapon taking shape, saw the energy cores being installed, saw the focusing arrays that would direct the blast, and Floette understood, with increasing horror, what all of this meant. The Pokémon tried to communicate its distress to AZ. Pokémon communication with humans is limited, especially for species like Floette, who lack the more obvious means of making their feelings known that larger or more expressive Pokémon possess. But Floette tried. It stopped floating beside AZ, keeping distance between them. It wouldn't accept food from his hand. When AZ spoke to it, Floette would turn away, a clear message of rejection. AZ noticed but misinterpreted these signs. He thought Floette was still traumatized by death and resurrection, still adjusting to being alive again. He convinced himself that once the weapon was deployed, once the war was ended and peace restored, Floette would understand why all of this had been necessary. They would have time then, endless time thanks to their immortality, to heal, to rebuild their relationship, to find their way back to each other. He couldn't see that each step he took toward deploying the weapon was driving Floette further away. Couldn't understand that the Pokémon was already grieving, mourning not for its own death this time, but for what AZ had become. The gentle king who had cherished a gift from his mother was gone, replaced by something cold and terrible, something that could contemplate genocide and call it justice. The day came when the weapon was ready. AZ had gathered intelligence on the army's positions, both his own forces and those of the enemy. The war had reached a stalemate, with both sides entrenched in defensive positions, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. The battles had moved to the area around Geosenge, ironically enough, putting both armies almost directly above the weapon that would destroy them. AZ descended into the weapon's control chamber alone. Floette followed at a distance, unwilling to leave entirely, unable to simply abandon the person it had once cared for, even though that person was now a stranger wearing AZ's face. The chamber was lit by the glow of energy cores, hundreds of them, each containing the life force of Pokémon who had died to make this moment possible. The weight of all those deaths hung in the air like a physical presence. The king stood before the weapon's activation controls, the key in his hand. This was the moment. One decision, one action, and he could end it all. End the war that had taken Floette. End the armies that had forced his Pokémon into battle. End the cycle of violence that had consumed his kingdom for so long. He had the power to remake the world, or at least to destroy the parts of it that had caused him pain. Did he hesitate? Did he consider alternatives, other paths, better choices? The historical record doesn't tell us. All we know is that he activated the weapon. The key turned in its mechanism. Energy surged through the system. And the machine, that terrible flower built from death and powered by stolen lives, unleashed hell upon the world. The blast from the ultimate weapon defies easy description. It wasn't simply an explosion, though explosion is the word most commonly used. It was more fundamental than that, more terrible. A release of concentrated life energy, weaponized, redirected, transformed into pure destructive force. The weapon fired its energy upward, through the earth, breaking through the surface in a pillar of light that could be seen across all of Kalos and beyond. The light, when it touched living things, didn't burn them or blast them apart. It simply ended them. Life energy flowing in reverse, unmaking what should never be unmade. The armies, thousands of soldiers from both sides, ceased to exist in an instant. Not painfully, at least there's that small mercy. One moment they were there, living, breathing, thinking. The next they were gone, their life force stripped away so completely that even their bodies disintegrated, leaving nothing but empty armor, abandoned weapons, and silence. The blast didn't stop with the armies, couldn't stop, given the amount of energy involved. It radiated outward from Geosenge, washing over the surrounding countryside, through forests, across plains, touching everything in its path. Wild Pokémon, caught in the blast radius, perished. Trees withered, grass died. The land itself seemed to recoil from the touch of that terrible light. And in the center of it all, in the weapons control chamber deep underground, AZ stood bathed in that same light. The machine was open system, designed to vent excess energy, and that energy flooded the chamber, saturated everything within it. The king was exposed to a concentration of life, energy-turned weapon that should have killed him instantly, would have killed anyone else. But AZ was already immortal, already transformed by his exposure to the resurrection device. The weapon's energy couldn't end him, but it could change him further. His body absorbed the blast, adapted to it, was fundamentally altered by it. He grew, not gradually but all at once, his frame stretching until he stood over 9 feet tall, a giant among humans. His lifespan, already infinite, was reinforced, locked in place so thoroughly that not even he could end it if he chose. The same energy that transformed AZ also permanently infused Floette. The Pokémon too became even more thoroughly immortal, locked into eternal existence by forces it had never asked for, never wanted, cursed to live forever bearing witness to what had been done in its name. When the blast finally dissipated, when the last of the weapon's accumulated energy was spent, silence descended on Geosenge town. The weapon stood inert, its flower form now a monument to atrocity rather than an active threat. AZ climbed from the underground chamber, emerged into a world he had fundamentally altered. The armies were gone, both of them completely annihilated. The war was over, ended not through victory or negotiation, but through the elimination of everyone involved in fighting it. AZ had achieved his goal. He had wielded power beyond anything the world had seen. He had taken his revenge on a world that had hurt him. And he looked for Floette, expecting to find the Pokémon beside him, expecting that now, finally, they could have peace together. But Floette was already leaving. The Pokémon had seen enough, understood enough, couldn't remain with someone capable of such monstrosity, even if that someone had once been kind, had once loved it, had once been worth loving in return. AZ called out, but Floette didn't stop, didn't even look back, simply floated away. The eternal flower clutched in its small appendages, putting distance between itself and the king who had destroyed the world for its sake. And AZ, Standing in the ruins of everything he'd done, felt something break inside him that hadn't broken before. This wasn't supposed to happen. Floette was supposed to understand, was supposed to see that everything, all the death, all the destruction, had been for it, to protect it, to ensure nothing could hurt it again. How could the Pokémon not see that? How could it leave when he'd sacrificed so much? But as AZ stood there, alone, the truth began to sink in. Floette hadn't wanted to be saved at the cost of so many other lives. Hadn't wanted resurrection powered by death. Hadn't wanted any of the terrible things AZ had done in its name. The Pokémon had tried to communicate this, tried to show him, but AZ had been too consumed by grief and rage to listen. And now Floette was gone. Not dead this time, which would have almost been a mercy, but simply gone. Walking away from him by choice, a rejection more complete than death could ever be. AZ had lost Floette twice now, once to the war and once to his own actions, to the monster he'd become in his obsession with bringing the Pokémon back. The weight of what he'd done began to settle on him then. The weapon had worked exactly as designed. The war was over. But the cost was unfathomable. Thousands dead in an instant, Pokémon and humans alike erased from existence. And for what? To satisfy one king's need for revenge? To make manifest one man's grief? AZ looked down at his hands, saw that they were different now. Larger, changed by the weapon's energy, marked forever by what he'd used them to build. He was a monster now, in body as well as deed. 9 feet tall, cursed with immortality, bearing guilt that would only grow heavier with each year, each decade, each century that stretched before him. The immediate aftermath of the weapon's deployment was chaos. News of the blast spread quickly despite the lack of modern communication. The light had been visible across half the continent. The sudden silence from the armies, from Geosenge town, from the entire area around the weapon's deployment, demanded investigation. When scouts and survivors from the periphery of the blast zone finally approached Ground Zero, what they found defied comprehension. Empty armor littering the ground in vast fields. Weapons scattered everywhere, still clutched by hands that no longer existed. The earth itself scorched, not by fire but by something else, marked by an energy that had fundamentally altered the nature of the ground it touched. And at the center, the weapon itself. The mechanical flower, massive and terrible and obviously artificial, rising from the ground where Geosenge town had stood. Some of the structures remained, but the people were gone, casualties of the blast just like the armies. The weapon stood as a monument to what had been done, impossible to hide, impossible to explain away. AZ's brother, whose existence is mentioned in historical documents though his name has been lost to time, understood immediately that the weapon could never be allowed to remain accessible. He organized an effort to bury it, to seal the underground chambers, to cover the entire structure with earth and stone until it was hidden from sight. It was a massive undertaking, requiring thousands of workers, taking years to complete. They couldn't destroy the weapon. The technology was too far beyond their understanding, and the risks of attempting to dismantle something that had contained such energies were too great. So they buried it instead, creating what would eventually become the standing stones of Geosenge, markers placed above the weapon's location, warnings carved in stone for future generations to heed. Some of the Pokémon who died in the weapon's creation and deployment left behind something physical. According to historical records and local legends, their life energy, their very essence, somehow crystallized in the aftermath of the blast, forming the standing stones that would dot the landscape around Geosenge, for millennia to come. Whether these stones are truly the remains of Pokémon spirits, or simply geological formations created by the weapon's energy, is debated by scholars, but the people of Geosenge have long regarded them as markers of sacrifice, physical remnants of lives consumed by AZ's machine. The weapon itself remained buried, its secrets locked away in the earth, waiting, but its effects rippled outward through time in ways no one could have predicted. Professor Sycamore, the Kalos region's foremost researcher millennia later, would theorize that the blast carried with it essence drawn from legendary Pokémon power. Whether Xerneas' ability to grant life and Yveltal's power over death were somehow incorporated into the weapon's design, either willingly or through some form of energy siphoning AZ had devised, remains uncertain. What we do know is that special stones, rare minerals that had existed in Kalos for millions of years, were fundamentally altered. Years later, when Mega Evolution was finally understood and documented, these transformed stones would be recognized as Mega Stones, capable of pushing Pokémon beyond their normal limits. The connection between the ultimate weapons blast and the creation of Mega Evolution remains the most widely accepted theory among researchers, though the exact mechanism continues to be debated. But this discovery lay far in the future. In the immediate aftermath of the weapon's deployment, no one was thinking about potential benefits or silver linings. What was certain was that the war had ended, but the cost had been too high. Kalos had won by destroying everything, by unleashing a force that had annihilated armies and scarred the land and created a wound in the world that would take generations to heal. And AZ, the architect of it all, found himself transformed into something between king and monster. He was technically still the ruler of Kalos, but his people looked at him with fear now, with horror. They knew what he'd done, they'd seen the results, and they understood that anyone capable of such destruction, even for reasons they might understand on some level, was too dangerous to be allowed to continue ruling. There is no trial, no formal deposition. AZ simply left, walked away from the palace one day, taking nothing with him except the key to the weapon which he wore around his neck as both reminder and burden. His brother assumed control of Kalos, beginning the work of rebuilding, of trying to move forward from apocalypse. And AZ began to wander, 9 feet tall, obviously different, unable to die, unable even to age normally. He became a nomad, a vagrant, a cautionary tale whispered around fires. The wandering king, the man who ended war, the giant who brought death. He was looking for Floette, of course. That was the only thing that still mattered to him. The Pokémon had left, but it was immortal too, somewhere in the world, alive and whole. AZ convinced himself that if he could find Floette, if he could apologize, if he could explain, then maybe, the Pokémon would forgive him, would come back to him, would make the endless years ahead bearable. But Floette was gone, hidden somewhere in the vast world, wanting nothing to do with the king who had destroyed so much in its name. And AZ's search, which would last for 3,000 years, was doomed from the start, because Floette didn't want to be found, didn't want to see AZ ever again. The Pokémon had made its choice, and that choice was to live an immortal existence, as far from its former companion as the world would allow. The years became decades, the decades became centuries. AZ wandered through Kalos and beyond. Historical records and regional legends place him in various regions throughout his 3,000-year journey. In Hoenn, approximately 1,000 years before the modern era, He planted a tree near the Cave of Origin in Sutopolis City, a tree beneath which grows an eternal flower like the one his Floette carries. He witnessed the cataclysmic battle between Primal Gruden, Primal Kyogre, and Mega Rayquaza, an encounter mentioned in Hoenn's oral traditions. References in Galar's history suggest he was present during that region's darkest day 3,000 years ago, making him a witness to multiple catastrophic events across the Pokémon world. His body continued to age despite immortality, a cruel trick of the energies that sustained him. His hair turned white, his face grew lined. He looked ancient, weathered by millennia, but he couldn't die. Couldn't find rest, couldn't escape the guilt that grew heavier with every passing year. 3,000 years is a timescale beyond human comprehension, longer than recorded history, longer than the existence of most languages, most cultures, most of the institutions we think of as eternal. And through all of it, AZ walked, searching for Floette, carrying his guilt, bearing the key to the weapon as a reminder of what he'd done, what he'd become, what he could never take back. In his wandering, he became a figure of legend himself. Stories were told about him, myths that transformed over the centuries until they bore little resemblance to the truth. Some said he was a god cursed for hubris. Others claimed he was the last survivor of a lost civilization. Still others whispered that he was death itself, walking the world, bringing doom wherever he appeared. The truth, as is so often the case, was both more mundane and more terrible than the legends. He was just a man who had loved something so much that he'd destroyed everything to get it back, and having gotten it back, had then destroyed everything again in rage at those who'd taken it from him in the first place. And having done all of that, had lost what he loved anyway, not to death or violence, but to its own choice to leave him. AZ visited Geosenge sometimes, standing before the stones that marked the weapon's burial place. The area had become a town again over the centuries. People settling there, building lives, forgetting the horror that lay beneath their feet. But AZ remembered, would always remember. Those stones were gravestones, markers for the Pokémon who died to power his machines, and he was the only one left alive who knew what they truly represented. He thought about activating the weapon again sometimes in his darkest moments. The key still hung around his neck. The weapon still lay beneath Geosenge, waiting, inert but intact. He could go down there, could turn that key again, could end everything, himself included this time perhaps, but he never did. Partly because he wasn't sure it would work on him anymore, not after all the changes the weapon's energy had wrought. Partly because ending the world wouldn't bring Floette back. But mostly because he recognized that deploying the weapon again would only prove that Floette had been right to leave, would validate every accusation the Pokémon had leveled against him with its departure. If he used the weapon again, he truly would be beyond redemption, beyond any hope of ever being the person Floette had once cared for. So he wandered, and he searched, and he carried his guilt forward through the centuries. And the world moved on, forgetting the details of what had happened 3,000 years ago, remembering only fragments, myths, the skeleton of truth stripped of its most painful flesh. Until the modern day, when a young trainer would stumble into Kalos's history, would find themselves caught up in a plot to reactivate the weapon, would ultimately face both AZ himself and the consequences of choices made 3 millennia in the past. But that story, as significant as it is, lies outside the scope of what we're exploring tonight. Tonight we're focused on the foundations, on the stories that made Kalos what it is, And AZ's story, for all its darkness, is only one thread in a larger web. Because while he walked the world, while he searched for forgiveness that might never come, another force watched from beneath the earth, monitoring, observing, maintaining the balance that AZ's weapon had so thoroughly disrupted. That force is our next story. The guardian who has no beginning or end, who was never one thing but always many things, who exists not as a single being, but as an idea made manifest through countless tiny fragments. The protector of the ecosystem who rises only when the balance of nature itself is threatened. Let's talk about Zygarde. In the depths of the earth, scattered across the Kalos region in numbers that would take years to catalog completely, something watches, not with eyes in the traditional sense, though eyes are involved, not with a single consciousness, though consciousness is certainly present. This guardian exists in a state between individual and collective, between sleeping and waking, between physical form and distributed potential. Zygarde is not a single Pokémon, or rather it is, but only when it chooses to be, when circumstances demand the consolidation of its scattered components into something more coherent, more powerful, more capable of direct action. Most of the time, Zygarde exists as fragments, as pieces of a whole that may never be fully assembled outside of the most dire circumstances. To understand Zygarde, we need to understand how it functions at the most basic level. The Pokémon is composed of two distinct types of components, each serving different purposes, each essential to the whole. There are the cells, small gelatinous beings that make up the vast majority of Zygarde's distributed form. And there are the cores, fewer in number, larger, more complex, serving as the brains, the decision makers, the pieces that give direction to the whole. The cells are remarkable in their simplicity. Each one resembles a small blob of green, semi-translucent material, vaguely reminiscent of a planarian worm if you're familiar with that creature, or perhaps a single-celled organism enlarged to Pokémon scale. Within each cell, you can see a hexagon, darker green than the surrounding material, floating in the cell's substance like a nucleus in a biological cell. This hexagon is the key to what makes Zygarde cells different from any other form of Pokémon we've encountered. The cells have no consciousness of their own, no will, no desires, no ability to make decisions. They're more like appendages than independent beings, extensions of something larger, controlled remotely by the cores. If you encountered a Zygarde cell in the wild, which is unlikely given their ability to become invisible when needed, you'd find it completely unresponsive to anything you did. It wouldn't react to danger, wouldn't flee from predators, wouldn't even acknowledge your presence unless a core somewhere decided that cell needed to take action. This distributed existence allows Zygarde to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Cells are scattered across all of Kalos, hidden in forests, buried in soil, floating in rivers, tucked into caves and crevices, in the dark places of the world where no one thinks to look. There might be a Zygarde cell within 100 feet of you right now, observing, recording, transmitting information back to the cores, and you'd never know it was there. The cores are different. There are only 5 of them, at least 5 that we know of. And unlike the cells, the cores are fully conscious, fully capable of independent thought and decision making. Each core looks similar to a cell at first glance. The same gelatinous green body, the same general blob-like shape. But cores have features that mark them as something more. They have 2 eyes, though one is significantly larger than the other, with a black pupil that gives the core an appearance of awareness that cells completely lack. Within each core's body, you can see a hexagon just like in the cells, but in cores, these hexagons are colored, red in some cores, blue in others. Whether these different colors indicate different roles, different areas of responsibility, or simply individual variation among the cores remains unclear from available observations. The cores can stand on their tail-like lower section, giving them a more upright posture than cells, another marker of their greater complexity. The cores are self-aware in every sense of the term. They can communicate with each other through telepathy, sharing information instantly across whatever distance separates them. They can make decisions, plan actions, coordinate responses to threats. They serve as Zygarde's true mind, while the cells serve as its body and its sensory organs. A core can perceive through any cell within its network, can see through a cell's perspective as if it were its own eyes, can gather information from thousands of locations simultaneously. This is how Zygarde monitors the ecosystem of Kalos, through an omnipresent surveillance network that spans the entire region, feeding constant streams of information back to the cores. Population levels of different species, health of forests and waterways. Energy flows through the land itself. The cores process all of this data, maintain awareness of the region's ecological balance, watch for threats, for disruptions, for anything that might require intervention. But Zygarde doesn't intervene lightly. Can't, really, not when its very existence is predicated on maintaining balance rather than imposing control. The Pokémon operates according to principles that seem to be built into its fundamental nature, rules it follows, not by choice but by design. It monitors constantly but acts rarely, only when the ecosystem itself is threatened with catastrophic disruption. The most significant such disruption in Kalos's history was, of course, the deployment of the ultimate weapon 3,000 years ago. Given Zygarde's distributed surveillance network spanning all of Kalos, it's reasonable to infer that the Guardian would have detected the weapon's construction through the countless cells positioned throughout the region. However, the weapon itself wouldn't have registered as an ecological threat until the moment of its activation. Building a device capable of ending the world isn't the same as actually using it. When AZ fired the weapon, the blast of transformed life energy that erupted across Kalos would have been impossible for Zygarde to miss. Every cell in the weapon's blast radius, every core monitoring the region's balance, would have registered the catastrophic disruption. The sudden absence of thousands of living beings, human and Pokémon alike, erased in an instant. The contamination of the land itself by energies that had never been meant to exist, let alone be weaponized. This was an ecological catastrophe of unprecedented scale, precisely the kind of event Zygarde exists to address. What specific actions the Guardian took in response aren't recorded in any surviving historical documents, but based on its known functions, we can infer that Zygarde worked to mitigate the damage where possible. The Guardian likely processed the foreign energy through its distributed form, filtering contamination through thousands of cells until the most immediate danger passed. It would have monitored the weapon's subsequent burial, ensuring that the sealing was thorough, and given AZ's transformation into something beyond normal human existence, Zygarde presumably maintained awareness of the king who now carried both immortality and the key to devastating power. In the centuries that followed, as Kalos slowly recovered from the weapon's deployment, Zygarde maintained its vigil. The Pokémon observed as new generations were born, as people who had no memory of the war built lives in the shadow of what had been done. It watched as the ultimate weapon passed from memory into legend, from legend into myth, from myth into something almost forgotten. But Zygarde never forgot. Couldn't forget, not when one of its primary functions was to maintain awareness of threats, and the ultimate weapon remained the greatest ecological threat ever to exist in Kalos. The weapon lay dormant beneath Geosenge, but dormant isn't the same as destroyed. It could be reactivated if someone found it, if someone understood what it was, if someone was willing to pay the same price AZ had paid. And so the cells remained scattered across Kalos, watching. The cores continued their eternal task of processing information, maintaining awareness, preparing for the possibility that intervention might one day be necessary. Zygarde exists in a state of permanent readiness, never truly sleeping, never completely at rest, always vigilant against the possibility of disaster. The Pokémon doesn't think about its task in emotional terms. It's not bored by the endless waiting, not impatient for action, not troubled by the weight of responsibility. Zygarde simply is, fulfilling its purpose as naturally as water flows downhill, as inevitably as seasons change. It is the guardian, it monitors. When necessary, it acts. This is what it was created or evolved or spontaneously manifested to do, and it does it with the dispassionate efficiency of a natural force. But this doesn't mean Zygarde lacks awareness or intelligence. The cores are fully sentient, capable of complex thought, able to make nuanced decisions about when intervention is warranted. They can distinguish between natural fluctuations in the ecosystem and artificial disruptions. They understand the difference between a forest fire caused by lightning and one set by human activity. They recognize patterns, predict consequences, calculate outcomes. The cores communicate with each other regularly, sharing observations, comparing data, reaching consensus on matters that require coordinated response. They don't have names, at least not in any human sense, though research in other regions has assigned designations to the cores encountered there. Z1 and Z2, the cores observed during events in Alola, showed distinct personalities despite their shared purpose, suggesting that each core develops its own perspective, its own way of interpreting the endless stream of information flowing through the cell network. The cells themselves experience nothing. They're tools, appendages, sensory organs without the capacity for sensation. But through them, the cores experience everything. Every forest in Kalos, every mountain range, every river and lake and coastline. The cells provide such comprehensive coverage that very little happens in the region without Zygarde's awareness. This includes awareness of legendary Pokémon, of course. Zygarde knows where Xerneas sleeps in its tree form, hidden in a forest whose exact location is known only to a few. It knows where Yveltal rests in its cocoon, dormant atop a mountain, waiting for its next cycle. The Guardian monitors both of these legendaries constantly, more carefully than it monitors anything else, because Xerneas and Yveltal represent the greatest potential threat to the ecosystem's balance. It's not that Xerneas and Yveltal are evil or malicious. They're not. They're forces of nature, embodiments of life and death respectively, operating according to their own cycles and purposes. But their power is immense, and power of that magnitude is inherently dangerous. If Xerneas were to awaken outside of its natural cycle and begin granting life indiscriminately, The resulting population explosion of plants and Pokémon could devastate the ecosystem through over-competition for resources. If Yveltal were to absorb life energy before its proper time, before its cycle demanded it, the result could be mass death on a scale that would make even the ultimate weapon's blast seem limited. So Zygarde watches them, cells, positioned near both legendaries, maintaining constant surveillance, ready to alert the cores if either shows signs of premature activity. The cores have protocols in place, responses ready to be implemented if the balance between Xerneas and Yveltal is threatened. This is perhaps Zygarde's most crucial responsibility, the reason it exists in the first place, to ensure that life and death remain in proper proportion, that neither overwhelms the other, that the cycle continues as it should. The cores get their energy through photosynthesis, absorbing sunlight directly, converting it into whatever sustains their unique form of life. This means they need to position themselves, or at least some of their cells, in places where sunlight can reach them. But cells can share energy throughout the network, so not all components need to be exposed. The system is elegant in its efficiency, requiring no food, no conventional resources, just light and the occasional consolidation of cells to maintain cohesion. When Zygarde does need to take physical form, when observation through distributed cells is insufficient and direct action becomes necessary, the consolidation process is remarkable. Cells from across the region begin moving, drawn by signals from the cores, converging on a location. They become visible during this migration, shimmering green shapes flowing across the landscape like a living tide, merging with each other, building mass. The form Zygarde takes depends on how many cells respond to the consolidation call. If only 10% of the available cells gather around a single core, Zygarde assumes what's known as its 10% form. This form is small, relatively speaking, resembling a dog more than anything else, black and green, with a distinctive leash-like extension from its neck, sharp teeth, powerful legs built for speed. The 10% form is used for reconnaissance, for situations requiring fast response but not overwhelming power. When 50% of the cells consolidate, Zygarde takes the form most people recognize, the serpentine shape that has come to represent the Pokémon in art and legend. This 50% form is larger, more intimidating, a massive snake-like creature with green hexagons visible along its body, black plating providing protection, and power sufficient to contend with most threats. This is Zygarde's standard battle form, the shape it assumes when intervention is necessary but not yet desperate. The complete form, 100% of all cells gathered around all 5 cores working in concert, is something different entirely. This form has only manifested a handful of times in recorded history, and each manifestation was in response to a threat of existential magnitude. The complete form is massive, humanoid, more like a mecha than an organic creature, with wings that aren't really wings, with separate cores positioned in those wings and tail, each operating semi-independently while coordinating with the others. In its complete form, Zygarde's power is said to exceed that of Xerneas and Yveltal, a necessary trait if its purpose is to maintain balance between these forces of life and death. Whether this represents literal combat superiority, or simply means that complete form Zygarde possesses sufficient power to intervene when either legendary acts contrary to the ecosystem's needs, the implication is clear. At full strength, the Guardian can fulfill its function, even against opposition from Pokémon of legendary magnitude. but achieving complete form requires specific conditions. All 5 cores must agree that the threat warrants full consolidation. All cells must be available to respond, not destroyed or trapped or otherwise prevented from joining the assembly. And the situation must be dire enough that the cores judge lesser forms insufficient. These criteria are rarely met, which is why complete form sightings are so exceptional. Most of the time, Zygarde remains distributed, watching, waiting, maintaining its endless vigil. The Pokémon has no life outside of this purpose, no relationships, no leisure, no moments of rest or celebration or grief. It simply exists in service to the ecosystem, as unchanging as the stones of Geosenge, as permanent as the mountains themselves. 3,000 years is nothing to Zygarde. The Pokémon doesn't experience time the way humans do, doesn't mark years or decades or centuries as meaningful units. There's only the eternal now, the constant stream of information flowing through the cell network, the endless task of monitoring and assessing and preparing for threats that might never come. But when they do come, when the balance is threatened, Zygarde responds with overwhelming efficiency. There's no hesitation, no doubt, no questioning of purpose. The Guardian acts because acting is what it does, what it was made for, what defines its existence. And in those moments, the distributed observer becomes a concentrated force, bringing to bear power that few Pokémon can match. The people of Kalos don't know this, of course. Most have never seen a Zygarde cell, never glimpsed a core, never witnessed consolidation into any of the Pokémon's physical forms. They go about their lives unaware that beneath their feet, flowing through their forests, drifting through their cities, an invisible network monitors everything, maintains balance, stands ready to intervene if intervention becomes necessary. It's a lonely existence, though Zygarde would never describe it that way, lacking the emotional framework to feel loneliness. But from an outside perspective, there's something melancholic about a being whose entire purpose is to watch and wait, to remain hidden and distributed, to act only when the world is ending and never receive acknowledgement or gratitude for the catastrophes prevented. Perhaps that's appropriate though. Guardians shouldn't need thanks. They serve because service is their nature, and Zygarde serves faithfully, eternally, asking nothing in return, expecting nothing, simply fulfilling the role it was created to fill in the ecology of Kalos. As the centuries passed and the world above evolved, as kingdoms rose and fell and new technologies emerged and old traumas faded into legend, Zygarde remained constant. The cells continued their monitoring. The cores processed endless streams of data, and the Pokémon waited, patient and eternal, for the next crisis that would demand its intervention. That crisis would eventually come, of course. In the modern era, when descendants of those who had buried the ultimate weapon would attempt to reactivate it, Zygarde would be forced to act. But that's a story for another time. Tonight we're focused on understanding what Zygarde is, not what it does in response to human foolishness. What it is, fundamentally, is a guardian, a protector, a force of nature tasked with maintaining balance in an inherently chaotic system. It's the invisible hand that keeps Kalos' ecosystem functioning, the silent watcher that intervenes only when intervention cannot be avoided, the distributed consciousness that experiences the region in ways no centralized being ever could. And somewhere in those same depths, where Zygarde's cores process their endless data streams, somewhere in the tunnels beneath Geosenge, in the forest where Xerneas sleeps, and the mountains where Yveltal rests, somewhere in the bones of Kalos itself, there lies the story of how all these pieces came together. How a region fractured by war and scarred by weapons became unified around a single beacon of culture and light. That beacon is our final story tonight, the city that stands at the center of Kalos, that draws people from across the world, that represents the best of what the region aspired to become, the place where technology and art and human ambition combine to create something extraordinary. Let's take a walk through Lumiose City. Imagine approaching Lumiose for the first time. You've been traveling through Kalos, through forests and caves and smaller towns, each beautiful in their own way, each offering glimpses of the region's character. But nothing quite prepares you for your first view of the city that serves as Kalos's heart. From a distance, before you can make out individual buildings or streets, you see Prism Tower. It rises from the center of Lumiose like a needle pointing toward heaven, or perhaps like a flower stem, given its distinctive shape and the way it tapers as it climbs. The tower is visible for miles, a landmark that draws the eye, a promise that something extraordinary waits ahead. As you draw closer, the city begins to reveal its true nature. Lumiose isn't laid out like most cities, with organic growth creating tangled streets and irregular districts. This city was planned, designed, built according to a vision of symmetry and order. From above, it resembles a wheel, with Prism Tower at the hub and broad boulevards, radiating outward like spokes. Between these spokes, smaller avenues curve in gentle arcs, connecting the major thoroughfares, creating a web of interconnected paths that make navigation logical once you understand the pattern. The outer ring of the city is divided into two major sections, North Boulevard and South Boulevard, separated by a canal that runs diagonally through Lumiose. This canal, the Saison Canal, isn't just functional infrastructure, though it certainly serves practical purposes. It's beautiful, lined with stone, crossed by bridges that are themselves works of art. The water reflects buildings and sky, adding movement and life to the city's geometry. Your first actual entry to Lumiose, in the narrative most travelers experience, comes from the south. South Boulevard is the first section that opens to visitors, the introductory chapter in Lumiose's story. Even this initial glimpse is overwhelming. The boulevard stretches before you, wide enough to accommodate both vehicle traffic and the Go-Goat shuttle, a public transportation system that uses Pokémon themselves as the means of conveyance. Buildings rise on either side, not the towering glass and steel structures of some modern cities, but elegant constructions that combine function with beauty. The architecture is distinctly Kalosian, inspired by the real-world Parisian style, but adapted for the Pokémon world. Buildings feature elaborate facades, wrought iron balconies, tall windows that let light pour into interior spaces. The streets are paved with cobblestone in many areas, giving each footstep a particular sound, a rhythm that becomes part of the city's soundtrack. Lampposts line the boulevards, not merely functional but decorative, works of art in themselves. As you walk South Boulevard, moving in either direction, you encounter the city's commercial heart. Cafes spill out onto sidewalks, small tables and chairs where people sit drinking coffee or tea, engaging in conversation, watching the endless parade of pedestrians and vehicles. Boutiques offer clothing in the latest Kalosian fashion. Office buildings house businesses whose nature isn't immediately apparent from the outside, but whose presence contributes to the sense of Lumiose as a place where important things happen. The Pokémon Center on South Boulevard serves as an anchor point, a place every trainer will visit multiple times during their stay in the city. Like all Pokémon centers, it offers healing services for Pokémon, but Lumiose's centers feel grander somehow, more in keeping with the city's scale and ambition. The clerks are professional, efficient, accustomed to handling the needs of trainers from across the world who come to Lumiose to challenge its gym, to compete in tournaments, to simply experience the city's unique energy. Near the Pokémon Center, you find Café Soleil, one of the many cafes scattered throughout Lumiose. This particular establishment will become significant in your journey through the city, a meeting place, a location where conversations happen that might change the course of events. But on first encountering it, it's simply another cafe, warm light spilling from its windows, the scent of coffee and pastries drifting out onto the street. The Shutterbug Cafe stands out for different reasons. This is where photographers gather, where people obsessed with capturing moments congregate to share techniques and discuss composition. The walls are covered with photos, an ever-changing gallery of Lumiose life captured through countless lenses. If you've been taking photos at the various photo spots scattered throughout Kalos, the proprietor here will have items for you, rewards for documenting your journey. Vernal Avenue branches off from South Boulevard, leading toward the city's center. This avenue is narrower than the boulevard, more intimate, lined with buildings that house some of Lumiose's most distinctive establishments. Boutique Couture stands as a temple to Colossian fashion, its windows displaying garments that seem almost too beautiful to wear. But the shop's reputation isn't built on what's inside, it's built on who can get inside. The proprietress, standing just beyond the threshold, evaluates every potential customer with a practiced eye, honed by decades in Lumiose's fashion scene. She notices everything, the cut of your clothes, the confidence in your stride. Whether you move through the city like someone who understands its culture, or merely visits as a curious outsider, those who pass her silent assessment are welcomed into a space most trainers will never see, where the finest clothing in all of Kalos hangs waiting for those discerning enough to appreciate it. Those who don't meet her standards are turned away with a polite smile and an unspoken message. Return when you've learned what it means to embody Colossian style. It's demanding, almost ruthless in its exclusivity, but this is the price of being the fashion capital of the world. Not everyone gets to participate. The Stone Emporium offers evolutionary stones for sale, precious items that can transform certain Pokémon. An old man in the shop sells mega stones, though at prices so astronomical that most trainers can only window shop, dreaming of the day they might afford such treasures. The stones are displayed like jewelry, each one representing power, transformation, evolution taken to new heights. Friseur Furfrou is exactly what it sounds like, a grooming establishment for a specific Pokémon species. Furfrou can have its fur styled in various elaborate ways, and this salon offers services that transform the Pokémon's appearance into something that matches Lumiose's aesthetic values. It's a frivolous service in many ways, pure fashion rather than function, but that frivolity is part of Lumiose's charm. Café Classe caters to fashion enthusiasts, people who come to Lumiose specifically for its reputation as a style capital. The patrons discuss boutiques, debate trends, dissect the latest looks. It's easy to mock such concerns as trivial, but in Lumiose, fashion is taken seriously, treated as an art form worthy of study and passion. The herborist sells medicinal herbs, bitter remedies that heal Pokémon effectively, but at the cost of reduced happiness. It's a trade-off, effectiveness versus palatability, and the shop's very existence speaks to Lumiose's pragmatism beneath its beautiful surface. Not everything in this city is about appearances. Sometimes what works matters more than what tastes good. As you navigate these streets, you become aware of something subtle but pervasive in Lumiose life. The city is always watching, always evaluating. Lumiose has an unspoken hierarchy, a social structure, built not on wealth alone, but on something harder to define. The locals call it having style, but it's more than fashion. It's about understanding the city's rhythms, knowing which establishments to patronize, showing the kind of discerning taste that marks you as someone who belongs, rather than someone just passing through. Shopkeepers notice regular customers, remembering faces, building relationships through repeated interactions. They're more likely to offer better prices, share insider knowledge, or simply treat you with the warmth reserved for those who've proven themselves part of the community. Taking time to appreciate what each shop offers, showing interest in individual items rather than rushing through transactions, demonstrates the kind of attention to detail that Lumiose respects. The city reveals itself differently to those who take time to explore its layers. Use the various transportation options, visit different districts, engage with the businesses and people that make each neighborhood unique. Gradually, imperceptibly, you'll notice doors opening that were previously closed. Exclusive boutiques will welcome you inside. Cafe staff will greet you by name. Service providers will offer discounts to a valued patron. This is how Lumiose works, not through explicit rules, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small choices that mark you as someone who understands what it means to truly experience the City of Light. And thoroughness pays off in Lumiose, because the city rewards those who explore beyond the obvious paths, who open doors that don't advertise their purposes, who take time to discover the layers hidden beneath the surface. Strange buildings dot the landscape, their purposes not immediately apparent. Unmarked offices contain people willing to share resources with curious trainers. Alleys connect districts in ways the main streets don't reveal. Lumiose is designed to be discovered gradually, its full character only revealing itself to those willing to invest the time and attention required. The Lumiose Transportation Office provides information about the 3 ways to move quickly through the city. The Go-Goat shuttle offers cheap transportation between North and South Boulevard, a leisurely ride that lets you see the city while traveling. Lumicab provides faster, more direct service to specific locations, expensive but efficient. And Lumiose Station houses the TMV, a high-speed train that connects Lumiose to Kiloude City, though this service isn't available until later in your journey through Kalos. The PR video studio caters to Lumiose's culture of self-presentation, where trainers aren't judged solely by their battle records, but by how they present themselves to the world. Inside, professional equipment and editing facilities allow trainers to craft brief promotional pieces, visual calling cards that capture their personality, their style, their approach to Pokémon training. Some trainers spend hours perfecting these moments, agonizing over backgrounds, poses, expressions that communicate exactly who they are or who they aspire to be. Others approach it more casually, but in Lumiose, even casual choices are scrutinized and interpreted. These videos circulate through the city's social networks, building reputations before battles even begin. creating expectations that trainers must then either meet or exceed. It's another layer of Lumiose's complexity, another way the city transforms simple acts into performances, into statements of identity and intent. The Pokeball Research Center employs scientists studying the technology behind Pokeballs. They'll give you items if you show them Pokemon with specific abilities, rewarding specialized knowledge and encouraging you to pay attention to the details of your team's composition. Cafe Introversion, despite its name, serves as a gathering place for those who are naturally reserved but still crave connection with others. The patrons here are known for discussing peculiar topics, almost philosophical in nature. They speak of shared experiences, of vivid dreams, of sensations that suggest they're aware of something beyond their immediate reality, as if being observed by unseen eyes. It's an unsettling place, a small corner of Lumiose, where the fabric of reality seems somehow thinner, where conversations drift into territories that make even curious visitors uncomfortable. Most trainers who wander in leave quickly, disturbed by discussions they can't quite follow, but that leave them feeling exposed in ways they can't articulate. Office buildings that serve no obvious purpose still merit exploration. Talk to everyone, examine everything, and you'll be rewarded with items, information, glimpses into the lives of people who make Lumiose function. A garbage collector discusses his work collecting trash across Kalos. An office worker complains about his job. A child talks about dreams of becoming a trainer. These small moments build up, creating a sense that Lumiose is more than just a game location, that it's a place where people live actual lives. As you explore South Boulevard thoroughly, you begin to notice the transitions to other areas. Gates connect to various routes, exits that lead out into the wilder parts of Kalos, but the most significant transition is inward, toward the center, toward the avenues that spiral toward Prism Tower. These paths are blocked initially, locked behind a story event, but their presence is tantalizing. Promises of more city to explore once certain conditions are met. The story event in question involves a blackout affecting most of Lumiose. Team Flare, the villainous organization pursuing their own agenda throughout Kalos, has caused a power outage that leaves much of the city dark and inaccessible. It's a clever gating mechanism, restricting access while giving a diegetic reason for the restriction. The city isn't just locked for gameplay reasons, it's experiencing a legitimate crisis that must be resolved before full exploration becomes possible. When the power does return, when you've dealt with Team Flare at the Kalos power plant and watched Clement, the Lumiose gym leader, restore electricity to his city, Lumiose transforms. Lights come on everywhere, displays activate, the city awakens fully. And suddenly, all those blocked passages open, all those inaccessible areas become explorable, and the true scope of Lumiose reveals itself. North Boulevard is similar to South Boulevard in layout, but different in atmosphere. The buildings are taller here, more imposing. The businesses more varied. This is where you find the Lumiose Museum, a cultural institution housing art and artifacts from across the Pokémon world. The museum costs money to enter, and you can purchase an audio guide that provides information about each piece. It's educational in a direct way, teaching about Kalos and other regions through the lens of art and history. Hotel Richissime represents Lumiose's luxury accommodations, a place where the wealthy stay when visiting the city. A single night here costs 100,000 Poké Dollars, an astronomical sum that clearly prices out most trainers, serving instead as a marker of the extreme wealth that flows through certain circles in Lumiose. But the hotel also offers something unusual: employment opportunities for those willing to work. The staff will hire temporary workers for various positions, making beds to exacting 5-star standards, managing the lost and found department where wealthy guests' misplaced items must be located and returned, or handling room service where memorizing complex orders and delivering them flawlessly is the basic expectation. The work is demanding, the standards unforgiving, but the compensation reflects the hotel's prestige. It's a glimpse into how Lumiose's service economy functions, how even establishments that cater to the ultra-wealthy create opportunities for those willing to meet their exacting standards. The Lumiose Museum stands across the street, serving as the city's cultural heart. The institution houses art and artifacts from across the Pokémon world, its galleries filled with paintings, sculptures, and historical pieces that tell the story of how different regions have expressed their identities through creative work. Visitors pay an admission fee, modest enough to be accessible to most trainers, and can rent audio guides that provide rich commentary on each piece, explanations of technique, historical context, the stories behind works that might otherwise remain opaque to those not versed in art history. The collection includes depictions of legendary locations: Sinnoh's Battle Frontier, Unova's impossibly tall Castelia City, and naturally significant landmarks throughout Kalos. For those willing to spend time truly engaging with the exhibits rather than rushing through, the museum offers education in the deepest sense, teaching how regions understand themselves and project that understanding through art. The Battle Institute provides competitive opportunities for trainers seeking to test themselves in structured formats. The Institute operates as a proving ground where trainers can measure their skills against standardized challenges, facing consecutive opponents under controlled conditions. Success here earns recognition within Lumiose's training community, along with access to rare items and resources available only to those who've demonstrated their capabilities. It's another facet of Lumiose's depth, giving trainers reasons to return repeatedly, to continue honing their skills, to engage with the city's systems beyond simple tourism or gym challenges. Lysandre Cafe sits on an alley between Magenta Plaza and Autumnal Avenue, innocuous from the outside, significant in ways that won't become apparent until later. This cafe serves as a front for Team Flare's operations, and beneath it lies Lysandre Labs, the headquarters of the villainous organization. But on first encounter, it's just another cafe, notable perhaps for the charismatic man who operates it, but not obviously connected to anything sinister. The Looker Bureau operates from a building on North Boulevard, though initially it appears to be nothing more than a vacant storefront. For most travelers passing through Lumiose, it remains exactly that, an empty space waiting for a tenant who never seems to arrive. But for those trainers who have reached the pinnacle of their craft, who have proven themselves as regional champions, and earned the respect of Kalos itself, that seemingly abandoned shop reveals its true nature. The doors open to those who've earned the right to enter, revealing an operational base for investigative work that delves into some of the city's darkest mysteries, handled by a detective whose methods are as unconventional as they are effective. Lumiose Station connects the city to Kiloude City via the TMV, a high-speed rail system that represents the pinnacle of Kalosian transportation engineering. The station itself is grand, built on a scale that announces importance before you ever board a train. The platforms gleam with cleanliness, maintained by staff who take visible pride in their work. The TMV itself is a marvel, sleek, fast, capable of covering distances that would take days on foot in a fraction of the time. However, the connection to Kiloude isn't open to casual travelers. Only trainers who've proven themselves at the highest levels of competition, who've earned recognition as true masters of their craft, receive authorization to make the journey. It's exclusive by necessity. Kiloude serves as a destination for the elite, and the TMV ensures that only those who've earned the right to be there can arrive. When you finally do board that train, when the station blurs past and you're racing toward Kiloude, the trip feels like crossing a threshold into rarefied air where only the best trainers exist. The avenues that spiral between North and South Boulevards each have their own character, their own establishments, their own reasons to visit. Estival Avenue features a Lotto ID center, one of Lumiose's more whimsical establishments. Each day the center draws a number, and trainers can check whether any Pokémon they own or have obtained through trade carries an ID number that matches. It's essentially a lottery, though one that rewards those who've been active in trading, who've built connections with trainers across the region and beyond. The prizes for matching numbers range from useful items to extremely rare treasures, making the daily visit to check your luck a ritual for many trainers passing through Lumiose. There's no cost to participate beyond the time it takes to stop by, making it one of the city's more democratic attractions. Anyone can win, regardless of wealth or status, as long as they've engaged with the broader Pokémon trading culture. Lumiose Press publishes books and papers, contributing to the city's reputation as a cultural center. Autumnal Avenue brings you to the juice shop, where you can purchase drinks that temporarily boost your Pokémon stats. Restaurant Lié offers battle challenges set in a dining format, victory earning you both money and meals. It's one of several restaurants in Lumiose that combine food culture with Pokémon training, a uniquely Kalosian approach to dining. The Pokeball Boutique sells special types of Pokeballs not available at standard Pokemarts. Dive balls, nest balls, timer balls, repeat balls, all the specialized catching tools that make certain situations easier. Having a shop dedicated entirely to Pokeballs speaks to how central Pokemon training is to Lumiose's economy and culture. Hibernal Avenue features Restaurant Luau, the most prestigious of Lumiose's battle restaurants. The challenges here are harder, the rewards greater, the prestige of victory more significant. It's where serious trainers come to test themselves, to prove their skills, while enjoying fine dining. Cafe Kizuna offers more casual fare and conversation, a neighborhood gathering place for Avenue residents. The 5 smaller plazas, arranged in a pentagon around Centrico Plaza, each have their own character. Vert Plaza to the southeast has Cafe Cyclone. Blue Plaza to the southwest serves as a quiet gathering space. Magenta Plaza to the northwest is built on a bridge over the Saison Canal, the Magenta Pokémon Center serving as the city's central landing point for flying Pokémon. Rouge Plaza to the north has Sushi High Roller and the Looker Bureau. John Plaza to the northeast features residential spaces, including Trevor's house. These plazas are connected by alleys that cut across the avenues, creating shortcuts, adding to the web-like complexity of Lumiose's layout. Learning these connections, understanding how to navigate efficiently, becomes part of mastering the city. You stop being a tourist and start being someone who knows their way around, who understands the rhythm and flow of Lumiose life. And at the center of it all, in Centrico Plaza, rises Prism Tower, The tower isn't just a landmark or a gym. It's Lumiose's symbol, the physical embodiment of the city's values and aspirations. Tall, elegant, technological yet beautiful, the tower represents everything Lumiose wants to be. The tower's design evokes the Eiffel Tower of Paris, but it's distinctly its own creation. The lattice structure climbs skyward in sections, each level slightly narrower than the one below, creating the impression of upward movement, of reaching toward something higher. The tower is lit from within, especially at night, when it becomes a beacon visible for miles, light radiating from every level, transforming the structure into something almost ethereal. Prism Tower houses the Lumiose Gym, where Clement, the city's gym leader, awaits challengers. The gym is a high-tech facility, fitting for a leader who specializes in electric-type Pokémon. The tower's design incorporates the gym seamlessly, making the entire structure functional as well as beautiful. You can't separate the gym from the tower, can't think of one without the other. The gym challenge involves navigating through Prism Tower's floors, each level presenting a different test. Clement's younger sister Bonnie has made it her personal mission to educate challengers along the way, presenting silhouette puzzles that test Pokémon knowledge. She shows the shadow of a Pokémon and asks you to identify it, with 3 trainers positioned at elevators corresponding to the 3 possible answers. To proceed, you must battle the trainer standing before the elevator you believe is correct. Choose correctly, and you advance. Choose wrong, and you still advance eventually. Bonnie believes in teaching through both success and failure, but you've faced an unnecessary battle along the way. It's a clever system that tests both knowledge and battling ability, ensuring that those who reach Clement have demonstrated well-rounded understanding of Pokémon training. Clement himself waits on the top floor, in a space that opens onto balconies with views of the entire city. Battling here feels significant, not just because of the gym badge at stake, but because of the setting. You're literally above Lumiose, looking down on the city that represents so much of Kalos's identity, fighting to prove yourself worthy of recognition from its official representative. The gym badge Clement awards, the Voltage badge, represents not just victory over the gym leader, but recognition from Lumiose itself. This is the 5th badge in the traditional Kalos journey, placing Lumiose right at the midpoint of a trainer's progression through the region. Earning this badge signifies that you've grown significantly since beginning your journey, that your Pokémon trust you enough to follow your commands even when they've grown powerful enough to potentially ignore less proven trainers. It's a milestone that marks the transition from promising newcomer to serious trainer, and receiving it in Lumiose, in the shadow of Prism Tower with the entire city visible below, carries special significance. But Prism Tower is more than just a gym. It's a gathering place, a tourist attraction, a symbol of civic pride. The citizens of Lumiose feel ownership of their tower, take pride in its presence. When the tower's lights activate after the blackout, when Clement restores power and the city illuminates once again, it's treated as a moment of celebration, of restoration, of things returning to how they should be. The tower's lighting system, designed by Clement himself, is an engineering marvel. He's not just a gym leader, but an inventor, someone who applies his understanding of technology and electric-type Pokémon to create practical innovations. The lighting system draws minimal power while producing maximum illumination, an efficient design that keeps the tower lit perpetually without straining the city's infrastructure. From the top of Prism Tower, Lumiose reveals itself in full. The wheel design becomes obvious, the perfect symmetry of the city's layout clearly visible. You can trace boulevards and avenues, identify the various plazas, see the Saison Canal cutting across the northern section. Beyond the city limits, the rest of Kalos spreads out, forests and mountains and routes connecting to other towns and cities. This view emphasizes Lumiose's centrality to Kalos. The city isn't just geographically central, but functionally so, a hub connecting all the other parts of the region. Roads lead to Lumiose from every direction. Trainers pass through on their gym challenges. Tourists visit from across the world. Business happens here that affects all of Kalos. The city is the region's beating heart, and from the top of Prism Tower, you can see that heart's full circulatory system, descending back to street level, returning to the bustle and noise and life of the city. You carry that aerial perspective with you. You understand now how Lumiose works, how its pieces fit together, how the designers intended people to experience it. The city isn't meant to be rushed through, but explored thoroughly, engaged with as a complete system rather than a series of disconnected locations. The restaurants scattered throughout Lumiose deserve particular attention, not just for their food, but for how they've elevated dining into a complete experience. Lena, Leia, and Lawao represent ascending tiers of culinary and competitive challenge, each one offering something distinctively Kalosian, the fusion of fine dining with Pokémon battles. The concept is elegant in its execution. You reserve a table and order a meal, but between each course, you face a trainer in battle. The servers themselves are skilled battlers, treating each encounter as seriously as they treat the presentation of each dish. The philosophy behind this approach speaks to Kalosian culture's refusal to separate different aspects of excellence. Why shouldn't fine dining include demonstrations of training prowess? Why shouldn't a Pokémon battle be preceded by expertly prepared appetizers? The restaurants vary in difficulty and prestige. Lena welcomes newer trainers, offering manageable challenges alongside affordable meals. Leia demands more skill and deeper pockets. Lawao sits at the pinnacle, where only the most accomplished trainers dare to make reservations, knowing they'll face opponents as refined in battle as the chefs are in cuisine. Victory earns you not just satisfaction, but tangible rewards. The restaurants are generous to those who prove themselves worthy of their tables. Sushi High Roller takes this concept to its ultimate expression, offering an experience so exclusive, so challenging, that only the region's elite trainers even attempt to secure reservations. The battles here are legendary in difficulty, faced only by those who've proven themselves at the highest levels of competitive training. The rewards for success are proportionally magnificent. This is where champions dine, where the best of Kalos come to test themselves against others of equal caliber. It's the kind of establishment that gives trainers reasons to return to Lumiose, even years after they first passed through, drawn back by the promise of challenges that match their evolved skills. The cafes, beyond their practical functions as places to rest and socialize, serve as windows into Lumiose's diverse communities. Café Bataille has become the unofficial gathering place for fighting-type specialists and martial artists, where black belts discuss strategy and philosophy over strong coffee. Café Triste is known among established locals as a place where the staff will sometimes offer to help exhausted trainers, fully restoring Pokémon teams for those they've come to know and respect through repeated visits. Café Ultimo attracts trainers obsessed with conditioning and specialized training techniques. their conversations dominated by discussions of strength and speed optimization. Cafe Action serves as the hub for those interested in public performance and self-promotion, sharing tips about creating effective promotional materials. Cafe Class caters to fashion enthusiasts. Naturally, given Lumiose's reputation as a style capital, each cafe has carved out its niche, attracting specific clientele, creating micro-communities within the larger city. These specialized cafes reflect how Lumiose's culture accommodates diverse interests and passions. There's space for fighters and fashionistas, for photographers and Pokémon enthusiasts of every stripe. The city doesn't homogenize its population, but celebrates specialization, creates gathering places for people who share specific interests. The office buildings, many of them unlabeled and easily overlooked, house their own small stories. In one building's third floor, you might encounter a researcher who, impressed by a Pokémon with rare abilities that she's studying, offers items as thanks for the opportunity to observe such a specimen up close. Another floor features a young girl who, simply out of kindness or perhaps boredom, hands over useful equipment to passing trainers. These encounters reward thoroughness, certainly, but more than that, they create a sense that Lumiose is full of people with their own reasons for generosity, their own small stories playing out in spaces most visitors never see. The strange building with the unexpected encounter stands out as particularly memorable and unsettling. On the second floor, in a hallway that feels somehow colder than it should, a figure passes by, pale, floating, there for just a heartbeat before vanishing into nothing. The encounter leaves questions unanswered, explanations absent. Some trainers who've experienced it convinced themselves they imagined it, that the lighting played tricks on tired eyes. Others swear they saw something genuine, something that reminds them that even in this modern, well-lit city, there are shadows and mysteries that technology cannot illuminate. The building offers no clarification. The other occupants seem oblivious, or perhaps carefully incurious, and eventually you move on, carrying the memory of that brief, inexplicable moment. It adds to Lumiose's depth, suggests that for all its rationality and order, the city still harbors things that resist simple explanation. The Saison Canal deserves its own consideration. The waterway is functional, allowing small boats to navigate through the city, but it's also beautiful, lined with walkways, crossed by elegant bridges. At night, when building lights reflect off the water's surface, the canal becomes especially lovely. A ribbon of moving light cutting through the city's geometry. The canal separates north and south boulevards physically, but bridges connect them functionally, ensuring the division doesn't create real barriers. You can cross at multiple points, can traverse from one side to the other easily. The canal thus serves as a dividing line without actually dividing, adds visual interest and practical function without impeding navigation. The Go-Goat shuttle runs between the boulevards, offering public transportation that's both practical and uniquely Kalosian. Rather than mechanical vehicles, the city employs Go-Goat, sturdy, patient Pokémon perfectly suited to carrying passengers through urban streets. The fare is modest, affordable even for trainers just beginning their journeys, making it the most democratic of Lumiose's transportation options. The trade-off for the low cost is time. Go-Goat move at their own steady pace, neither rushing nor dawdling, giving passengers a slower, more contemplative experience of the city. You notice things from the back of a Go-Goat that blur past when walking or racing by in a cab. The details of architectural facades, the way light falls through the gaps between buildings, the rhythm of street life unfolding around you. The go-goat themselves seem to enjoy their work. These gentle creatures content to carry their burdens through the city they've come to know intimately. Lumicab represents Lumiose's solution to urban transportation for those willing to pay premium prices. The drivers know every street, every shortcut, every efficient route through the city's circular design. They're professionals who take pride in their speed and their knowledge of Lumiose's geography, but they're also trainers. This is Lumiose after all, where Pokémon battles are woven into the fabric of daily life. If a passenger finds themselves short on fare, most drivers offer an alternative. Defeat them in battle, and the ride is free. Lose, and you'd better have another way to cover the cost. It's not charity, exactly, but it's not purely business either. It's the Kalosian way of doing things, where even commercial transactions can become opportunities for competition, for respect earned through skill, rather than simply handed over with money. The entire transportation system reflects Lumiose's modernity, its sophistication, its understanding that a great city needs great infrastructure. You can move through Lumiose efficiently or leisurely, depending on your needs and preferences. The city accommodates both approaches, serves both the hurried businessman and the casual tourist. As evening falls on Lumiose, as the sun sets and the city lights activate, the character of the place transforms. During the time period we're familiar with from exploring the region as trainers, the daytime bustle gives way to different energy, still lively but changed in quality. The cafes fill with evening customers. Restaurants begin their dinner services. Prism Tower's illumination becomes more prominent as natural light fades. Walking through Lumiose at night is a different experience from exploring during the day. The shadows are deeper, the contrast sharper. The lit windows of apartments reveal glimpses of domestic life, people living their evening routines in the heart of this grand city. The streets are quieter but not empty, populated by different types of people. Those who prefer the night, who come alive when darkness falls. The city's beauty is perhaps most apparent at night, when the intentional illumination highlights architectural details, when Prism Tower becomes a lighthouse guiding everyone home, when the whole urban landscape glows like a jewel against the darkness. This is when you understand why people call Lumiose the City of Light, why it's famous not just in Kalos but across the world. And yet, for all its light, for all its illumination, Lumiose has its dark corners, alleys that don't quite fit the city's pristine image, buildings with locked doors hiding unknown purposes. The awareness that Team Flare operates here, that beneath the beauty and culture and civilization, danger lurks. Lysandre Labs exists beneath Lysandre Cafe, a hidden facility where terrible plans are made, where the ultimate weapons reactivation is plotted. This duality is essential to understanding Lumiose fully. It's not simply a beautiful city, but a complex one, housing both inspiration and danger, both culture and conspiracy. The same advanced technology that lights Prism Tower can be turned to destructive purposes. The same sophisticated society that creates great art and cuisine can also produce individuals willing to commit atrocities in pursuit of their vision of perfection. But on most nights, for most people, these dark undercurrents remain hidden. Lumiose is simply home, or a destination, or a place of wonder. People dine in restaurants and shop in boutiques and walk their Pokémon in plazas. Trainers challenge the gym and celebrate their victories and nurse their defeats. Tourists photograph landmarks and marvel at the tower and try to capture the essence of Lumiose in images they'll show to friends back home. The city lives, breathes, changes with each passing hour, while remaining fundamentally itself. It's a monument to human ambition, to the belief that through planning and technology and collective effort, something extraordinary can be built and maintained. It's a beacon showing what Kalos can achieve when it puts aside war and destruction and focuses instead on creation, on beauty, on bringing light to the darkness. Standing in Centrico Plaza late at night, looking up at Prism Tower rising into the darkness above, you can almost believe that the past 3,000 years of Kalos history were leading to this moment. That all the pain and tragedy and horror served some purpose, taught lessons that made this city possible. That AZ's weapon, terrible as it was, somehow created the conditions for Lumiose to eventually emerge, for light to triumph over darkness, for civilization to prove stronger than destruction. It's a comforting thought, perhaps necessary for processing the scale of what came before, but it's also a dangerous thought, suggesting that atrocity can be justified by later achievements, that the ends can excuse the means. The truth is more complicated, less narratively satisfying. The city exists despite the ultimate weapon, not because of it. Lumiose is humanity's attempt to move beyond war, to create something worth preserving, to build a future that honors the past without repeating its mistakes. And in that sense, Lumiose is a testament to resilience, to the stubborn human insistence on building even when destruction seems easier, on creating light even when darkness threatens to overwhelm. The city stands as proof that 3,000 years after the worst atrocity in Kalos history, life continues, culture flourishes, beauty persists. This is what Legends ZA will explore when it releases. This tension between past and future, between destruction and creation, between the weapon that scarred Kalos and the city that rose to become its greatest achievement. The game's focus on Lumiose's urban redevelopment suggests we'll see the city evolving, changing, perhaps facing new challenges that echo old traumas. But that's speculation about what might be, and tonight we've focused on what is, on the stories already told, the history already written, the foundations upon which new tales will build. We've traveled from 3,000 years in the past to the modern day, from a heartbroken king to a distributed guardian to a city of light. These three stories, different as they seem, are all part of the same larger narrative. AZ's weapon and Zygarde's vigilance and Lumiose's beauty are connected by more than simple chronology. They represent different responses to the same fundamental challenge. How do we live in a world where such terrible things are possible? AZ's answer, born from grief and rage, was to wield that terrible power himself, to become destruction incarnate, to ensure that nothing could ever hurt him again the way Floette's death had hurt him. It was an understandable response, perhaps, but ultimately a futile one. You can't protect what you love by destroying everything else. You can't find peace through genocide. The weapon gave him power, but that power couldn't give him what he actually wanted, which was simply to have Floette back, happy and safe and whole. Zygarde's answer is different, almost opposite. The Guardian doesn't seek power for its own sake or deploy force except as a last resort. Instead, it watches, monitors, maintains awareness, intervenes only when necessary, and then only to the degree required. Zygarde represents restraint in the face of power, patience in the face of threats, the understanding that sometimes the best action is no action, that observation often serves better than intervention. And Lumiose's answer, the city's very existence, is perhaps the most hopeful of the three. Lumiose says that humanity can build something beautiful even after committing atrocities. That civilization can recover from its worst moments. That 3,000 years is long enough for wounds to heal, for new generations to create futures not defined by the past traumas. The city stands as an act of defiance against the despair that AZ embodied, a declaration that life and culture and beauty are worth pursuing even in a world where weapons like his can exist. These three answers don't contradict each other so much as they exist in dialogue, each informing and qualifying the others. AZ's tragedy shows what happens when power is pursued without wisdom. Zygarde's eternal vigil demonstrates the need for oversight, for forces that maintain balance even when humans lose their way. And Lumiose's splendor proves that redemption, if not for individuals, then at least for civilizations, is possible. As we look toward Legends ZA, as we anticipate returning to Lumiose and exploring whatever mysteries the game will reveal, these foundations matter. Understanding AZ's history helps us comprehend the weight he carries, the reasons he might be involved in whatever plot the game presents. Knowing Zygarde's purpose and methods prepares us for its potential role, for the ways it might manifest to address new threats. In appreciating Lumiose's significance, its meaning as symbol and achievement gives context to whatever urban redevelopment plans the game explores. The stories we've traced tonight aren't just background lore or optional flavor text. They're the bedrock of Kalos, the essential truths that define the region and shape its future. Every building in Lumiose stands on land once scarred by the ultimate weapon. Every wild Pokémon in Kalos' forest is monitored by Zygarde's distributed network. Every person living in the present carries forward, consciously or not, the legacy of choices made 3,000 years ago. And that's beautiful in its own way. History isn't something that stays safely in the past, locked away and irrelevant. It flows forward, shapes the present, constrains and enables the future. The Kalos region in the modern day exists because of decisions made by a heartbroken king, because of a guardian that never stopped watching, because people chose to build something beautiful in the aftermath of horror. When you walk through Lumiose now, knowing what lies beneath Geosenge, knowing that Zygarde cells are scattered everywhere observing, knowing that AZ still wanders seeking redemption, the city means something different. It's not just a cool location or a central hub, it's an achievement purchased at terrible cost, a declaration of intent, a promise that whatever darkness came before, whatever challenges lie ahead, Kalos will endure, will create, will shine light into shadows. As the night deepens and this story draws toward its conclusion, I want you to think about what these tales mean to you. Maybe you've played through Pokémon X and Y before, encountered these elements of lore firsthand. Maybe this is all new to you, discovered through this retelling. Either way, the stories remain powerful, archetypal in their structure, while specific in their details. A king who loved too much and destroyed everything. A guardian who watches forever, patient and inhuman. Oh, city that rose from the ashes to become something beautiful. These aren't just Pokémon stories, they're human stories, exploring themes that resonate across cultures and times. Loss and revenge, duty and sacrifice, recovery and hope. The narratives that define us as people who must live with consequences, who must find meaning in suffering. who must build futures despite not knowing what those futures hold. Legends ZA will add new chapters to these stories. Will show us AZ 5 years after his reunion with Floette, apparently running a hotel, apparently finding some measure of peace. We'll explore Lumiose's redevelopment, the ways the city is changing and growing and facing new challenges. Will undoubtedly involve Zygarde somehow, given the Z in the title, given the Pokémon's significance to Kalos's ecological balance. But those new chapters will only resonate if we understand the foundations. If we know where AZ has been, what he's done, what 3,000 years of guilt and searching have cost him. If we grasp Zygarde's nature, its distributed existence, its role as guardian and overseer. If we appreciate Lumiose not just as a game location, but as a symbol of Kalos's resilience and ambition. Tonight, we've laid these foundations as thoroughly as possible. We've spent hours exploring these stories, these places, these ideas that make Kalos unique among Pokémon regions. We've traced the threads that connect past to present, that link a weapon of mass destruction to a city of light, that bind a lonely wanderer to an eternal guardian to millions of people simply trying to live their lives. And now, as this bedtime story of Kalos finally reaches its end, as your eyes grow heavy and the night deepens around you, I hope these stories rest in your mind the way good stories should, not as mere facts to be memorized, but as living narratives that spark imagination, that create emotional resonance, that make you care about fictional places and characters as if they were real. Because in the way that matters most, they are real. These stories exist. They were created by talented writers and developers who wanted to give depth and meaning to a Pokémon game, who believed that even in a series primarily about catching creatures and battling with them, there's room for tragedy and redemption and the long arc of history. And because they were created with care and thought, because they were given substance and detail and emotional truth, they transcend their origins as game lore and become actual stories worth experiencing. So sleep well tonight, knowing that Kalos has its guardian watching from the Earth's depths, its cells scattered across the region, maintaining the balance that makes life possible. Know that somewhere, a 9-foot-tall man who was once a king walks through the world, carrying guilt and hope in equal measure, trying to atone for the unforgivable. Know that in the heart of Kalos, a city of light stands gleaming, a beacon of what humanity can achieve when it chooses creation over destruction, beauty over brutality, hope over despair. These stories will be waiting when you wake. Kalos will still be there, its history intact, its present continuing, its future unfolding. And when Legends ZA releases, when we finally return to Lumiose and discover what new tales await, we'll be ready. We'll understand the context, appreciate the significance, recognize the echoes of old stories and new events. Until then, rest well. Dream of serpentine guardians and eternal flowers and cities that glow like stars against the darkness. And remember that every story, no matter how dark its beginning, can find its way toward light. Even if it takes 3,000 years, even if the path is longer and harder than anyone imagined, even then, light is possible. Hope endures, and somewhere in Lumiose City, in the shadow of Prism Tower, the future is being built one day at a time. Before I let you go, don't forget to leave a like on this video if these stories resonated with you, and subscribe to Slumber Senpai if you want more deep dives into video game and anime lore. Your support makes these lengthy projects possible and lets me know that there's an audience for this kind of comprehensive storytelling. I'll be here, ready to guide you through more tales, more histories, more journeys into the rich worlds our favorite games and shows create. Sweet dreams, everyone, and may your journey through Kalos, whenever you take it, be filled with wonder, discovery, and stories worth remembering. Good night.